I don't know how this plays with people who have a slightly more internationalist or cosmopolitan view of the world. I'm not here to defend the fact that we are inevitably more interested in a story the closer to home it is, and therefore the killing of 3 British military veterans who were working as security guards for the charity convoys is bound to attract a lot more attention than any killing of non-British people, even when it reaches into the 30,000s. That's just the nature of... I don't think it's even the nature of news, is it? Isn't it just the nature of... Isn't it just the nature of humanity? I don't, just bear with me on this, all right? Because we're going to get stuck into some very heavy conversation. So trust me when I tell you that what I mean, this might sound a bit odd, but your ears prick up, right, when your hometown is in the news, especially if you grew up somewhere that is not in the news very often. If you grew up in London, this probably doesn't happen, but your borough of London, if you hear it in a news bulletin, if you hear Bexley or Brentford or Stoke Newington in a news bulletin, then or if you're not in that, if you hear Kidderminster or Chorlton-cum-Hardy or I don't know, Burnham Market, you just notice it differently, even though you've never met the person that the story is about. You just notice it differently. So I understand some of the unhappiness about the difference in coverage given to the killing of 3 British people as opposed to 33,000 Palestinian people, but I don't think it speaks to anything other than a perfectly natural sense of sort of geographical and human priority. I just get that out of the way early. We won't detain ourselves unduly with that particular issue, because what we have now is a British political problem. You have 2 essential problems. The first is that the government remains broadly supportive of the Israeli offensive in Gaza. And, of course, we continue to sell arms, although nothing like the amount of arms that America sells. In fact, I don't even know that removing British weapons from the marketplace for the Israeli government would have a measurable effect upon their capacity. I don't have the knowledge to comment on that. But goodness me, there's a moral principle in play, isn't there? Even if there is not a logistical one. The British government now has a problem. This isn't sort of collateral damage or friendly fire. This is evidence of how dangerous it is to be in Gaza at the moment. And we're only talking about it because 3 British citizens, 3 former British servicemen, have been killed deliberately. These missiles did not hit these vehicles by accident. It's important that our syntax and our language is correct. These missiles were very deliberately targeted, and it was a hat-trick of attacks upon 3 separate vehicles, deliberately spaced apart for safety reasons. And if it illustrates anything, it illustrates just how dangerous it is to be in Gaza today, regardless of whether you are a Hamas terrorist or a newborn baby. And it seems to me this morning that the attempt by Benjamin Netanyahu's government to justify the killing of anybody and everybody has reached a critical moment. Now, you are welcome. Remember, this is a phone-in show. You are absolutely welcome to dispute and to challenge anything that I said. Unfortunately, if you're in the mood to do so, you now have some of the more shrill supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu, both in government and in the media, here in America and Israel, saying the quiet bit out loud, essentially justifying the killing of everybody in Gaza because of the actions of Hamas. And that was never going to wash, I don't think, with the broader international community. It certainly was left behind by British public opinion some time ago, a very long time ago, in fact. We've concerned ourselves on this programme with questions that I think in retrospect were quite horribly poignant, questions about when too much will become too much, when too many killings, too many deaths. How much is too much? These crucial but simplistic and largely unanswerable questions. But I think that the subtext has been throughout a slow move towards the place where there is no limit upon death. Remember, 0345 6060 is the number you need if you don't like any of what I'm saying. But you remember when the conversation was about how they wouldn't ever possibly target a hospital. And now they've targeted countless hospitals. I don't think there are any hospitals left. The idea that it was being a surgically conducted in order to go after Hamas, that Hamas was somehow destroyable, the prioritization of hostage releases overrode everything else. I mean, none of it really stands up to scrutiny anymore. So the resistance to the idea that Benjamin Netanyahu was embarked upon the destruction of the Palestinian people in Gaza, either through death or removal, which is, of course, logistically impossible, largely because of Israel, partly because of Egypt, I don't know that position is resistible anymore. So I have two questions for you this morning. The first I want you to really think about, and that is, what does this teach us? Because it seems to me that the refusal of Israel to let foreign correspondents into Gaza becomes deeply sinister on a day like today. We have to rely upon approved sources or the IDF or the desperate Palestinian journalists, residents still alive, because goodness knows how many have been killed. We have to rely upon that source of information for our facts. Any facts coming from anywhere else are immediately disputed. Human Rights Watch tells us that the Palestinian Health Authority is well above average when it comes to showing its workings, when it relies upon mortuaries and hospitals, or not many hospitals left anymore, as we said, but it relies upon mortuaries and hospitals for death notices, and it details, it lists, it publishes as much detail as it possibly can about anybody listed as having been killed. But still, up to and including the BBC, whenever we mention the death toll, we add, according to the Palestinian Health Authority, which is controlled by Hamas. Now, that throws doubt on the figures. So why don't we add that now to Israel? Why don't we say, well, these figures, according to Israel, which has been shown to have been economical with the truth about everything from beheaded babies. There's no evidence. Even Joe Biden talked about babies having been beheaded. There is no evidence of that. So why don't we do that with Israel now, after they killed 3 British military heroes? And they're conducting their own inquiry into it while still not letting foreign journalists into the territory. So what did we learn? What do we learn from the killing of these 3 former British servicemen? I think if you hadn't learned this lesson already, you can no longer pretend not to believe that everybody in Gaza is a target. 0345 6060 And here's a slightly more complicated question. The front pages are united today in their condemnation. The cheaper prints lean more towards emotion, of course, with talk of heroes and veterans. The slightly more serious newspapers descry the outcry over the aid worker deaths. The Telegraph tells us that Rishi Sunak is demanding answers after Israel airstrike kills Britons. Well, I've got some bad news for Rishi Sunak. Benjamin Netanyahu couldn't give 2 figs about what you think, mate. He couldn't give 2 figs, because if he did, this wouldn't have happened. If he did, the rhetoric, let alone the military action, would have been very different if he cared a jot about what Rishi Sunak thinks. It's questionable now whether he cares about what Joe Biden thinks. Joe Biden has released a statement in the last few minutes expressing utter horror at what happened in Gaza to these aid workers. And the question then becomes, what do you want your government to do now? So those are your 2 questions. What do we learn from this killing? This very deliberate and targeted killing of an aid convoy in 3 separate vehicles deliberately spaced apart in order to minimize the likelihood of casualty, being taken out by the same drone in 3 separate missiles and leaving 3 British military veterans dead, along with 4 other aid workers. What do we learn from that? And what do you want your government to do? The numbers you need this morning are 0345 6060 973. And I am going to ask you a question that I've already at least partly answered. If you have family in Gaza or the West Bank, do you understand why, finally today, Israel's, I'd like to say indiscriminate, it's almost more forgivable if this was accidental. Do you understand today why Israel's very deliberate killing of completely innocent people is finally getting the coverage that you have felt for months that it deserves? Do you understand why? Because if you don't, I don't laugh or think that I've lost the plot. If you don't understand why, I think I'd like to help you. Because it must be awful to be sitting there, having lost family perhaps already, wondering why finally now people in this country, people in my profession, people around you, finally now people seem to be saying enough is enough. Because the death toll, I think I heard one statistic that it was eight deaths an hour since October the 7th. I may have got that wrong. It may have been 8 a day. I forget. But the point is, it's huge now. The numbers almost become too big to compute. And yet it is these 7 deaths, and very particularly these 3 deaths, that seem to have moved the dial. You will remember, I think, that when the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, in an appearance on, I think, Ian Dale's programme, it almost sort of said that there can be no limit on the killing. There is no... I mean, forget the precise words, and one has a great responsibility to be very careful here, but I'll tell you how I'll phrase it. The idea among supporters of the Israeli military and the Israeli government that there are no innocent people in Gaza, I think has just been completely destroyed, hasn't it? And I think that they were relying upon that and have relied upon that up until this point. There are no innocent people in Gaza. Well, what about the aid workers and the British military heroes who are there to protect them? I should stop saying heroes. I criticise others for being too emotional. So there it is. What do we learn from this, and what do you want your government to do?